The drawer stuck for a second, then slid open with a soft groan. Daniel froze, heart hammering in his chest. He hadn't meant to pry, but something about his mother's sudden secrecy had driven him here, into Catherine's private study. Between her pearl necklaces and folded silks lay a small envelope, edges worn, paper yellowed like it had been touched too often. He pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside were photographs. His mother, Catherine, laughing in the arms of a man who was not Richard Miller. The rival's face was unmistakable. Victor Lang, Richard's sworn enemy in the world of billion-dollar deals. The air seemed to collapse around Daniel. He clutched the photos tighter, hearing footsteps echo in the hall. Catherine's perfume filled the doorway before she did, her elegance shadowed by something sharp in her eyes. "What are you doing in here?" she asked softly, too softly. Daniel swallowed. "Who is he?" His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with betrayal. Her lips pressed together, trembling only for a second before she regained her composure. "Those pictures mean nothing. You don't understand." "Don't understand?" Daniel's fist tightened around the envelope. "This is Lang. If Dad ever sees this—" Her hand shot out, snatching at the photographs, but Daniel pulled back. For a flicker of a moment, mother and son stood locked in silent war, their eyes mirroring the same fear. Exposure. Catherine's mask broke. Desperation slid into her voice. "Daniel, listen to me. If your father finds out, he'll ruin me. He'll ruin all of us. This family, it won't survive the scandal." Daniel stepped back, throat dry, chest heaving. "So it's true. You're having an affair?" The silence was unbearable. Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then a soft rustle made Daniel turn. Elena stood at the far corner of the hallway, tray in hand, her dark eyes fixed on the scene, too still, too knowing. She should have walked away, but she didn't. Catherine's face paled. Daniel caught it immediately. "You knew," he whispered, realizing. "She knows everything." Elena lowered her gaze, but not before he saw it. The shadow of power in her look, a secret she'd been carrying far too comfortably. "Be careful, Daniel," she said quietly, almost like a warning, almost like a threat. Some truths destroy more than lies ever could. The hallway felt colder, the weight of betrayal thicker than the air. Daniel stared at his mother, then at Elena, realizing he was no longer just a son stumbling on a family secret. He was caught in a trap woven long before he opened that drawer. And somewhere behind Elena's calm voice, he thought he saw it. A faint smile, like she was holding the match that could set the empire on fire. The mansion's dining hall glittered with chandeliers, but beneath the glow, silence pressed like a weight. Catherine sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her diamond earrings catching the light. Richard hadn't come home yet, and that was the only reason she could breathe. Daniel across from her hadn't touched his plate. His fork scraped once, then stilled. Finally, he broke the silence. "How long has Elena been holding this over you?" Catherine's eyes flicked to the tall windows, as if the answer might be hiding in the dark gardens outside. "Lower your voice," she whispered sharply. "She's blackmailing you, isn't she?" His words were too loud, bouncing off the crystal glasses. The door creaked, and both turned. Elena entered quietly with a decanter of wine, her expression composed, almost serene. She poured into Catherine's glass, then Daniel's, as though nothing had been said, but her pause lingered. Just a second too long when Daniel's glass was full. "Isn't it late for red wine?" Daniel muttered, eyes narrowing. Elena tilted her head, a faint smile tugging her lips. "In this house, Mr. Daniel, it's never too late for anything." Catherine shot her a sharp look. "That's enough, Elena. Leave us." Elena bowed her head politely, but her gaze lingered on Daniel, heavy with unspoken meaning, before she vanished down the hall. The silence she left behind felt poisonous. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice this time. "She has the pictures, doesn't she? She's the reason they weren't destroyed." Catherine's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. "You don't know what you're talking about." Daniel slammed his fist softly against the table, the crystal trembling. "I know you, Mother. You'd never keep evidence of your affair unless someone forced you to. She's been waiting for this." For a moment, Catherine's mask cracked. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with raw fear. If Richard finds out, he won't just end me, Daniel. He'll end everything. The empire, the legacy, even you. Do you understand what your father is capable of? The sound of Richard's car pulling up the driveway cut through the tension. Tires against gravel, the slam of a door. Catherine straightened instantly, her hand clutching Daniel's wrist. "You say nothing," she hissed, her voice a mix of plea and command. "Not a word." Daniel wrenched his wrist free, eyes burning. "Secrets don't stay buried, Mother." The front doors opened, footsteps echoing closer. Catherine's breathing grew shallow, her perfect composure hanging by a thread. Then, just as Richard's shadow loomed in the hallway, Daniel caught a glimpse of something in the corner of the room. A silver envelope tucked beneath the flower vase. It hadn't been there before. He pulled it out with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph. Catherine with Victor Lang, her lips dangerously close to his. On the back, a note scrawled in neat handwriting. "How much longer can you hide?" Richard's voice boomed from the hall. "Catherine! Daniel!" Catherine's face drained of all color. Daniel stared at her, the photo burning in his hands, realizing this wasn't just a secret. This was a war someone was already orchestrating inside their home. Rain lashed against the glass walls of Richard's study, thunder rolling like a warning. Catherine stood near the fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Daniel paced the carpet, the photograph still clutched in his hand, though he had slipped it into an envelope to keep it hidden from his father. Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, his eyes sharp, studying them both like prey. "You're both acting strange," he said finally, voice low and measured. "What are you hiding?" Catherine's lips curved into a practiced smile. "Strange. Richard, it's late. We're tired. Perhaps it's just the storm unsettling everyone." Daniel froze mid-step, his jaw tightening. He wanted to throw the photo on the desk, to watch the empire his father built shatter in one night. But something in Catherine Yu's eyes begged him to stay silent. A silent war flickered between them in that look, his hunger for truth against her desperation to bury it. Richard rose, circling the room with the quiet menace of a predator. "Funny. Storms don't unsettle me, lies do." He stopped behind Catherine, placing his hands gently, too gently, on her shoulders. "And lately, I smell lies in my own house." The grandfather clock ticked. Rain pounded harder. Catherine kept her smile, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the edge of the mantel. Daniel felt his throat tighten, the words clawing to get out. Before he could speak, a soft knock came at the door. Elena slipped in, her hair slightly damp, her eyes lowered. She carried a tray with coffee, though the air already reeked of tension thicker than smoke. "Shall I leave it here, Mr. Miller?" Richard nodded absently, his attention fixed on Catherine. Elena set the tray down, her gaze brushing Daniel's for just a second. In that fleeting glance, he saw it. Knowledge, maybe triumph, maybe warning. She knew exactly what he was hiding. As she turned to leave, Daniel's voice cracked the silence. "Elena," she stopped, glancing back, calm as ever. His hand trembled toward the envelope in his pocket. Catherine's eyes went wide, shaking her head ever so slightly, a desperate plea. Richard's brow furrowed. "What is it, Daniel?" Daniel swallowed hard, the envelope burning like fire against his chest. He forced his hand down, the words choking back. "Nothing. Just thank you for the coffee." Elena's lips curved in the faintest smirk before she slipped out, closing the door softly. Richard studied his son, suspicion hardening his gaze. "You're lying too now, Daniel? Like your mother?" The accusation struck like lightning. Catherine's breath caught. Daniel's fists clenched. But before anyone could answer, Edward's cane struck the marble floor outside the study. The sound echoed, slow and deliberate, like the footsteps of a judge. The door creaked open, and there stood the patriarch, Edward Miller, leaning heavily on his cane yet radiating authority. His silver hair gleamed in the firelight, his eyes sharper than any of theirs. "Lies," Edward said softly, his voice cutting through the storm. "They rot this family from within, and I can smell them tonight." Richard stiffened, Catherine lowered her head, and Daniel's heart pounded. Edward's gaze swept the room, finally landing on Daniel. "What truth are you hiding, boy?" The envelope slipped slightly from Daniel's pocket, just enough for Catherine to see the corner, peeking out. Her sharp inhale betrayed her terror. Edward's eyes narrowed, catching the movement. "Show me what you have." Daniel froze, trapped between his grandfather's demand, his mother's silent pleas, and his father's growing suspicion. The storm outside howled, but it was nothing compared to the storm about to erupt inside the Miller Empire. Edward's cane struck the marble again, sharp and commanding. The fire hissed in the silence as Daniel froze, the envelope still half visible from his pocket. Catherine's breath came in shallow gasps, her hands clasped as though she were holding herself together by sheer force. Richard's jaw tightened. Suspicion had already hardened into something sharper. "Show me," Edward repeated, his voice quiet but absolute. Daniel's fingers twitched against the envelope. His throat felt dry, as though the air itself was suffocating him. Catherine stepped forward quickly, her voice trembling with carefully painted calm. "Father, it's nothing. Just old letters. They don't matter." Edward's gaze cut to her. "When you lie to me, Catherine, your voice shakes." The words struck like a blade. Catherine faltered, her mask breaking for the briefest second. Daniel looked at her. His mother, elegant, fragile, begging with her eyes for him to stay silent. His chest tightened with conflict. "Daniel," Richard said suddenly, stepping closer, his shadow falling over his son. "If you're keeping something from me, you won't just regret it. You'll wish you weren't born my heir." His hand extended, palm open. "Give it." The envelope felt like a ticking bomb. Daniel's body shook, torn between loyalty and rage. He could feel every pair of eyes on him. The ruthless father, the terrified mother, the calculating grandfather. And then, from the hallway, a sound. A faint scrape, like a shoe against the marble. Daniel glanced over. Elena stood in the half-darkness, her face calm, her presence too perfectly timed. Edward noticed her too. "You?" he said sharply. "How long have you been standing there?" Elena dipped her head. "Long enough to know the boy shouldn't be cornered like prey." The room stiffened. Richard's fury sparked instantly. "You forget your place." But Edward's eyes narrowed, intrigued. "Speak, Elena." She took a step inside, her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. "Secrets demand to be revealed, Mr. Miller. But not tonight. Not like this. If Daniel gives you what he holds, the storm outside won't be the only thing tearing this family apart." Her voice was calm, but her words laced with poison. Catherine staggered back against the mantel, whispering, She knows everything." Daniel's hand trembled. He shoved the envelope back into his pocket, defiant now. "I'm not giving it to anyone, not until I know the truth." Richard lunged forward, fury flashing in his eyes, but Edward raised his cane, blocking him. "Enough!" The old man's voice thundered over the storm. "If he wants the truth, he will get it. Tomorrow morning, all of us in the dining hall. No more shadows, no more whispers." The crack of thunder outside seemed to seal his decree. Richard seethed, Catherine turned pale, and Elena's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. Daniel exhaled, shoulders heavy with dread. He had delayed the inevitable, but only for a single night. As Edward turned to leave, his cane tapping like a gavel, he said one last thing over his shoulder. "And God help the one whose lies I uncover first." The fire hissed, the storm raged, and in the silence that followed, Daniel realized tomorrow would decide who survived in the Miller Empire. The dining hall stretched long and cold the next morning, chandeliers glittering against the silence. Silver cutlery gleamed untouched on the table, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel sat rigid at one end, the envelope still hidden inside his jacket, his pulse hammering with every tick of the grandfather clock. Catherine sat across from him, her eyes red from a night without sleep, her fingers twisting a silk napkin until the threads nearly tore. Richard stood by the window, staring out at the storm-soaked gardens, shoulders squared like a soldier waiting for battle. At the head of the table, Edward lowered himself into his chair, his cane resting against the polished wood. He scanned them one by one, his gaze sharp enough to slice flesh. "No more games," he said. "Whoever holds the truth will place it here." He tapped the table once. "Now." The silence was unbearable. Daniel's hand drifted to his jacket, but Catherine's whisper cut through the air. "Don't." Richard spun around, eyes narrowing. "So it is you!" he hissed at her. "What have you done, Catherine?" Her breath caught. Richard, please. Edward slammed his cane on the table, making the glasses rattle. Out with it! Daniel couldn't bear it anymore. He pulled the envelope free and laid it on the polished wood. The sound of paper hitting the table was louder than thunder. Richard snatched it instantly, tearing it open. His eyes devoured the photographs, and with each image his face darkened, veins rising in his temple. Victor Lang's face, Catherine in his arms, smiles too intimate to deny. The silence shattered. Richard's roar filled the hall, his fist slamming down so hard the plates jumped. You betrayed me with him, with Lang? Catherine broke, tears spilling down her face. It wasn't what you think. Don't you dare! Richard's voice cracked with fury, yet beneath it was something raw, almost broken. He turned on Elena, who stood quietly at the edge of the room. You knew. You've been feeding on this like a rat in the walls. Elena's gaze was steady, her voice quiet but sharp. Sometimes the walls see more than the people inside them. I warned you. Truth destroys more than lies. Richard's hand trembled, crushing the photographs in his fist. Catherine sobbed openly now, pleading. It was before everything with the company, before the wars between you and him. It was a mistake, Richard. A mistake that never should have lasted on paper. Edward's voice, cold and final, cut through her cries. Mistakes in this family cost empires, and empires do not forgive. For a moment, no one breathed. Daniel watched his father's rage, his mother's collapse, his grandfather's merciless decree. And something inside him broke. Enough! He shouted, slamming his hands on the table. All of you care more about the empire than the family. You talk of betrayal, but this entire house runs on lies. His chest heaved, his voice raw. I won't be part of it anymore. He rose, his chair scraping back violently. Catherine reached for him, but he pulled away. Richard barked his name, but Daniel ignored him, his footsteps echoing as he stormed out. The last sound in the hall was Edward's low murmur, spoken more to himself than anyone else. And so the heir walks away. Catherine sobbed into her hands. Richard stared at the crumpled photographs with fire in his eyes, and Elena's faint smile lingered in the shadows. The Miller Empire still stood, but fractured, bleeding, and forever changed. The storm outside had passed, but inside the mansion, it had only just begun.